When referring to the Israelites, Jews in the country of Israel, many people think that these are just different names for the same concept. However, historical and theological facts show that these are three different terms with separate meanings and formed over thousands of years of complex development of a nation. Understanding the difference between Israelite, Jew, and Israel not only helps us understand the history of the Bible, but also explains how the modern Jewish identity was formed. Israelite, ancient Israel, who are the real ancestors. The term Israelite appears earliest in the Bible, referring to the direct descendants of Jacob, Abraham's grandson. Jacob was later renamed Israel by God, meaning he who wrestled with God. Genesis 32:28. Jacob had 12 sons, each head of a tribe, forming the 12 tribes of Israel. Therefore, all descendants of Jacob, regardless of tribe, were called Israelites, ancient Israelites. In the early period, the name Israelite did not distinguish between region or religion, but was simply an ethnic term based on bloodline. Those who were descendants of Israel, Jacob. They all lived under the covenant between God and their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, recorded in the Hebrew Bible. Jew, Jews. Not all Israelites are Jews. The term Jew appeared later in history and was originally used only to refer to people of the tribe of Judah, one of the 12 tribes of Israel. When the ancient kingdom of Israel split in two around 930 BC after the death of King Solomon, the northern part, consisting of 10 tribes, was still called the Kingdom of Israel, while the southern part, including the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, was called the Kingdom of Judah. The word Jew, Hebrew Yehudi, comes from the tribe of Judah itself. So not everyone was called a Jew at first. An Israelite from the tribe of Reuben, Gad, or Naphtali, for example, was not a Jew in the original sense. But over time, when the northern kingdom of Israel was conquered by the Assyrians and the 10 tribes were dispersed, called the lost 10 tribes, only Judah and Benjamin remained in the south and maintained their religious traditions. Therefore, the word Jew gradually came to represent the entire remaining Israelite community, those who kept the Jewish religion and maintained the covenant with God. It is noteworthy that during the Babylonian exile, 6th century BC, the word Jew began to mean not only bloodline, but also religion, referring to those who worshiped the God of Israel, observed the Torah, the law of Moses, and the traditions of their ancestors, whether they lived in Jerusalem or abroad. That is why people say every Jew is an Israelite, but not every Israelite is a Jew. Israel, country, people, or theological concept. The term Israel has many layers of meaning. In the Bible, Israel was originally the name of Jacob, then used to refer to the 12 tribes of his descendants. Next, when the tribes were established, the kingdom of Israel during the time of kings, Saul, David, Solomon was the first political name of the ancient Jewish state. After being divided, the name Israel belonged to the north, while the south was Judah. However, after the destruction of the north, the name Israel gradually became a more sacred symbol, representing all of God's covenant people, regardless of whether they were still living in the Promised Land or in exile. Today, Israel is also the official name of the modern state established in 1948, the State of Israel. However, modern Israeli citizens of the State of Israel, including Jews, Muslims, Christians, Druze, should not be confused with Jews, Jewish people, those who maintain Jewish identity either by culture, religion, or blood. A person can be a Jew without being an Israeli, for example, a Jew living in the US or France. Conversely, an Israeli can be a non-Jew, for example, a Muslim or Christian citizen of Israel. Why is this distinction important? Distinguishing between Israelite, Jew, and Israel helps to understand the history of the Bible, the background of religious figures, and the formation of the modern Jewish people. Many concepts in the Bible, from prophecy to the covenant with God, are associated with the nation of Israel in a spiritual sense, not just a geographical sense. Misunderstandings between these three terms can easily lead to distortions in the interpretation of the Bible religious doctrines, and even modern political and social debates in the Middle East. Therefore, understanding the nature and history of each concept will help us have a more comprehensive, fair, and accurate view. The history of ancient Israel took a major turn after the death of King Solomon, when the united kingdom of the 12 tribes of Israel split into two kingdoms, the north and the south. This event was not only a political event, but also marked the beginning of the formation of Jewish identity as we know it today. From here, concepts such as Jew no longer simply meant a tribe, but became a symbol of an entire community that was attached to the faith and law of God, even though they had to live in exile. The division of the kingdom, internal conflict, and ethnic rift. Around 930 BC, after the death of King Solomon, the United Kingdom of Israel, consisting of 12 tribes represented by the sons of Jacob, fell into turmoil. Solomon's successor, King Rehoboam, his son, imposed heavy taxation policies, causing discontent among the people. As a result, 10 of the 12 northern tribes rebelled and seceded, forming the Kingdom of Israel under the leadership of Jeroboam. Meanwhile, the 2 southern tribes, Judah and Benjamin, remained loyal to the lineage of David and continued to exist under the name Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as their capital. This was an extremely important turning point, because from this point on, the Israelites were no longer a unified people. The northern kingdom, Israel, occupied the majority of the territory and population, but was unstable in terms of religion and politics. They quickly fell into pagan worship, building their own places of worship in Samaria and Dan, replacing Jerusalem. This led to serious religious conflicts with the south, which still maintained the worship of Yahweh at the Jerusalem temple. The fall of the Kingdom of Israel. The 10 tribes disappear. In 722 BC, the Assyrian Empire, one of the greatest powers in the Near East at that time, invaded and completely destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel. They captured most of the inhabitants of the 10 tribes and sent them to foreign lands, and at the same time they migrated foreigners to replace them in order to erase the ethnic identity and beliefs of the Israelites there. From then on, the 10 northern tribes gradually disappeared from history. They no longer maintained their identity, no longer maintained their traditional beliefs, and assimilated into the surrounding peoples. This is the origin of the 10 lost tribes of Israel, one of the greatest religious and historical mysteries of all time. To this day, many scholars, religions, and different communities still claim to have originated from these tribes, but no authentic historical evidence has been completely confirmed. The Kingdom of Judah, the remaining nucleus of the covenant people. Meanwhile, the southern kingdom of Judah survived for another 130 years, maintaining its center of worship in Jerusalem and upholding the Mosaic religious traditions. Despite its moral and political decline, it retained its connection to the covenant with God, something the northern kingdom had lost. In 586 BC, the newly emerging Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar attacked and destroyed Jerusalem. The temple was burned, the walls collapsed, and a large portion of the population was taken into exile in Babylon. However, it was in this situation of losing their homeland and the Holy Temple that the people of Judah transformed themselves dramatically. In the Babylonian exile, Jew becomes a religious and cultural identity. From this point on, the people of Judah began to be called Jews, from the Hebrew Yehudi derived from Yehuda, Judah. But unlike the original concept of bloodline, the word Jew now has a deeper meaning, one who keeps the faith, the law, and the covenant of God wherever he is. Without the temple, the Jews built synagogues, places to gather, study the Bible, and pray. The role of the rabbi began to emerge, forming the foundation of later Rabbinic Judaism. Rituals such as keeping the Sabbath, eating kosher circumcision, and learning the Torah became core elements of Jewish identity. This is what makes the Jews different from most other ancient peoples. When exiled or assimilated, many peoples disintegrated, were wiped out. But the Jews did not. They disappeared from the political map, but became a mobile religious and cultural community, carrying their faith wherever they went. Returned to the Promised Land, reaffirming Jewish identity after exile. About 70 years later, when the Persian Empire defeated Babylon, King Cyrus ordered the Jews to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. A large number returned to Jerusalem, rebuilt the Second Temple, and continued to maintain their traditions. However, some remained in the diaspora in Babylon, Persia, Egypt, etc. From this point on, the term Jew was no longer limited to the territory of Judah. A Jew was understood as anyone who kept the Jewish faith and maintained the traditions of their ancestors regardless of where they lived. The Israelite identity by blood gradually faded, while the Jewish identity, a combination of religion, law, and culture, became the core. After the Jews returned from Babylonian exile in the late 6th century BCE, they entered a completely new phase in their religious and cultural history. No longer an independent kingdom or a people tied to a fixed territory, the Jews transformed their identity into a more enduring belief system, based not on temples or government, but on law, scholarship, and community. This was the turning point that brought Judaism into the Rabbinic period. the foundation for Jewish religious life for the next 2 millennia. Return to the homeland, a new beginning under Persian rule. In 538 BCE, King Cyrus the Great of the Persian Empire conquered Babylon and issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem. This return took place in several waves, led by figures such as Ezra, a priest and Torah scholar, and Nehemiah, a Persian-appointed governor. Although the Jews were allowed to rebuild the temple, completed around 515 BC, they continued to live as a politically supervised community. However, it is noteworthy that they did not demand the restoration of David's kingship, but focused on the restoration of religious, moral, and social order according to Torah law. It was during this period that Torah study and teaching began to overtake temple ritual as the focus of community life. This was led by the scribes, the forerunners of the later rabbis. From sacrifice to law, changing the center of faith. When the second temple was built, the sacrifice was still re-established, but the exile left an indelible mark. The Jews no longer considered temple ritual as the sole factor shaping their faith. During the time without a temple, they learned to observe the law, pray, and practice their religion in everyday life. This created the basis for the model of mobile Judaism, not dependent on a fixed sacred place. Under the Persian and then Greek empires from the 4th century BC, Jewish communities began to appear and grow outside the land of Israel, especially in Egypt and Babylon. These communities lived in different cultural environments, but still kept the Torah, the Hebrew language customs, such as kosher, keeping the Sabbath and studying the Bible. They were no longer a kingdom, but became a people of faith attached to the law of God. The rise of religious groups, Pharisees, Sadducees, and polarization in Jewish society. During the Hellenistic period, when Alexander the Great conquered the Near East, and then the Roman period, the Jews faced a strong influence of Greek culture, especially in education, sports, philosophy, and mythology. This created two opposing reactions in Jewish society. The Sadducees, mainly priests and aristocrats, lived near the temple in Jerusalem and cooperated with the government. They only recognized the written Torah, the Pentateuch, and rejected oral traditions. The Pharisees, coming from the common people, they emphasized the study of law, ancestral traditions, and the application of Torah to daily life. They were the forerunners of the later Rabbinic movement. There were also the Essenes, hermits, monks, and the Zealots, rebels against Rome, but it was the Pharisees who had the most lasting influence, because when the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, their model of worship was the only one that survived. 70 Anno Domini, the temple is destroyed, Judaism is restructured. The destruction of the Second Temple by the Romans in 70 AD was a historic shock. For the Sadducees, who were attached to temple ritual, it was their end. But for the Pharisees, it was an opportunity to completely convert to a form of religion that did not need the temple. From this point on, Rabbinic Judaism became the orthodox form of Judaism. This system is based on Torah study and teaching, including both the written Torah and the oral tradition later recorded in the Mishnah and Talmud. Rabbis' role not only as a teacher of the law, but also as a moral guide explaining the law in specific living conditions. Synagogue becoming the center of worship, scholarship, and community activities. What is special is that this model does not depend on geographical or political location. Thanks to that, the Jews can maintain their faith and culture even though they are scattered around the world. After 70, the Jewish community no longer has a state, no longer has its own army or territory. However, they still exist and develop as a community united by religion, law, language, and collective memory. The concept of Jew from here officially becomes a cultural, religious identity, not just a name of a people by bloodline. A Jew does not necessarily have to live in Israel, does not have to be of the tribe of Judah, but is a covenant keeper through Torah tradition and community. In 1948, the world witnessed a landmark event in Jewish history, the birth of the modern state of Israel. After nearly 2,000 years of exile around the world, without a state army or government of their own, the Jews finally established an independent state in their ancestral land, the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah in the Bible. However, this does not mean that all Jews are citizens of Israel, and conversely, not all citizens of Israel are Jews. The difference between the two concepts of Jewish and Israeli needs to be clearly and precisely understood, especially in the context of modern times and global political and social debates. The Zionist movement began in the late 19th century by Theodor Herzl, aiming to build a safe homeland for the Jews after centuries of discrimination, oppression, and exile. After World War II, and especially the Holocaust, which killed 6 million Jews, the international community realized the urgent need to establish a separate state for the Jewish people. On May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion, head of the Jewish Agency, officially proclaimed the establishment of the State of Israel in Tel Aviv. The United States and the Soviet Union were the first countries to recognize Israel's sovereignty, and just one day later, 5 Arab states declared war, starting a war for independence. During the 1948-1949 war, Israel not only maintained its territory according to the United Nations partition plan, but also gained additional land. However, as a result, more than 700,000 Palestinians left or were expelled from their homeland, an event that Arabs call the Nakba catastrophe. Israel also received a massive wave of immigration from all over the world. In the first 3 years after the founding of the state, Israel's Jewish population doubled, from about 700,000 to 1.4 million. They came from Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Many were Holocaust survivors. Many were Jews expelled or forced to leave Arab countries after the 1948 conflict. It is worth noting that from the beginning, Israel was not just a Jewish nation in the religious or ethnic sense, but a multi-ethnic democratic state. According to the Declaration of Independence, Israel pledged to guarantee equal rights to all its citizens, regardless of religion, ethnicity, or gender. Thus, in addition to about 75–80% of the population being Jewish, about 20% were Arabs, including Muslims, Christians, Druze, and other minorities. These citizens have the right to vote, to be educated, and to participate in politics. But there are still challenges to equality and identity in modern Israeli society. The difference between Jewish and Israeli is twofold. Jewish is an identity that has religious, genetic, and cultural elements. A person can be considered Jewish if they are born to a Jewish mother or if they formally convert to Judaism. Jews can live anywhere in the world, America, France, Russia, Australia, and still be considered Jewish if they retain that identity. Israeli, on the other hand, is a legal concept, a citizen of the State of Israel regardless of religion or ethnicity. A Muslim born and raised in Haifa is still an Israeli even if he is not Jewish. Conversely, a Jew living in New York, Paris, or Buenos Aires is still a Jew but not an Israeli if he or she does not have Israeli citizenship. Interestingly, over the generations, a new identity has emerged, Sabra, used to refer to Jews born in Israel. This concept implies a new generation, strong, tough, outspoken, different from the previous diaspora exile generation. Sabra has become a symbol of the modern Israeli spirit, confident, independent, and attached to the ancestral land not only by faith, but by the reality of survival. However, maintaining two identities in parallel, Jewish and Israeli, also raises many questions about policy, citizenship, immigration, and the role of religion in the state. The law of return allows all Jews in the world to become Israeli citizens, but does not apply to Palestinians. At the same time, Jews who convert to non-Rabbinic Judaism sometimes face obstacles when applying for immigration, part of an internal debate in Israel between religious, political, and civic groups. In the Bible, the people of Israel are not only a group of people living in the ancient Near East, but also the center of a divine plan that stretches from creation to the end of time. From the time of Abraham, God promised to establish an everlasting covenant with his descendants, a chosen people to become divine instruments of blessing for the whole world. Therefore, the prophetic role of Israel is not only in the historical past, but also opens up a global and eternal future perspective. Understanding this will help the audience not only grasp the brief history of the Bible, but also see the big picture of the faith and significance of the people of Israel in the flow of human history. According to the book of Genesis, Genesis 12:3, God said to Abraham, "In you all the nations of the earth will be blessed." This is not a promise of a purely personal nature, but also a statement of a collective mission for his descendants, the people of Israel. They were not just a distinct people, but the first people called to live by divine principles, justice, mercy, holiness, and a direct relationship with God. When the Israelites accepted the Mosaic law at Mount Sinai, they officially became a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, Exodus 19:6, representing humanity in covenant with God. However, the Bible also records a long series of disobedience, sin, and exile on the part of the Israelites. This was not a rejection by God, but part of a process of purification, correction, and restoration. Prophets such as Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Hosea were sent to call the people back to the covenant and to foretell a new era, when God would make an everlasting covenant, write the law on people's hearts, and reestablish a new Israel. In Ezekiel 37, the prophecy of the plain of dry bones describes a miraculous resurrection of the people of Israel, bringing with it the promise of both physical and spiritual restoration. One of the most striking prophetic images is the idea of the reunification of Israel and Judah, the lost 10 northern tribes and the 2 remaining southern tribes. Ezekiel 37:16-22 describes the 2 sticks joined together, symbolizing a united people under God, under a Davidic king, the Messiah. This prophecy is not only about national restoration, but also opens up hope for all humanity. For it is from Israel that the Messiah will come to redeem the world. In the New Testament, Christian writers see that promise fulfilled in Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem of the line of David and taught in the heart of Israel. In Romans 11, the Apostle Paul explains that Israel was not rejected by God, but was temporarily hardened to allow the Gentiles to enter the covenant community. Paul uses the image of an olive tree. The natural branches the Jews are temporarily cut off, while the wild branches the Gentiles are grafted in. But one day the natural branches will be grafted back in, and the whole olive tree will be reborn. This is a prophecy of a spiritual Israel, where both Jews and Gentiles belong to the same community of faith in the new covenant. Therefore, Israel's role is not limited to being the first people to receive the law, but also the foundation for the revelation of the Messiah, through whom all humanity can enter into the covenant with God. The Bible does not deny the specialness of Israel, but always affirms that the ultimate goal is for God's blessing to spread to all peoples. In Isaiah 49:6, God says of his servant, "I have made you a light for the nations, that you may bring salvation to the ends of the earth." From a prophetic perspective, the existence and rebirth of Israel, from ancient times to the present, is not a historical accident, but rather a confirmation of a larger plan that extends beyond time. For many Bible believers, the reestablishment of the State of Israel in 1948 is a sign that the prophecies are gradually being fulfilled. While it is impossible to make definitive statements about the timing, it is clear that Israel continues to be central to religious, theological, and salvation historical thinking. More importantly, the story of Israel is a reminder of God's faithfulness to his promises. Despite the unfaithfulness of his people, he remains faithful. This is not just the history of a people, but a story of covenant, of restoration, of hope, that everyone, regardless of origin, is called to a living relationship with God. Israel is thus not just a nation or an ethnic group, but a spiritual symbol of a great plan of salvation for all humanity.